Tomorrow morning, Dad packs up and leaves. I already signed the papers. Sold the lake house outright, and your Ford too. Jackson said it while I was bent under the hood, my hands still slick with cold oil. I didn't look up. Outside, the winter wind slammed against the garage door, like a reminder that Christmas was close. That house, that car, they were things I had held on to my whole life. The irony was this. The child I raised believed I no longer had the right to keep them. If you're listening to this story, and you're still here with me, subscribe to the channel and tell me where you're listening from in the comments. And now, let's continue. I wiped my hands on an old rag, folded it slowly, and set it on the shelf. Jackson was still standing there, hands in his coat pockets. Chloe leaned against the garage door like this was just a procedure already planned out. Neither of them looked at the 1967 Ford Mustang behind me. Maybe to them it was just an object, something that could be converted into money. I asked again, my voice so calm it surprised even me. "What did you just say?" Jackson sighed. Like I was the one exhausting him. He repeated it. Slower, clearer, added details about the contract, the buyer, the deposit that had been used at the right time. Chloe cut in, her voice flat. She explained that everything was reasonable and good for the family. She said the word family very lightly, as if this lake house had never been the place where her mother died, as if it wasn't the place I promised I would never leave. I looked out the window. Lake Michigan was partly frozen, gray, and still. I remembered Martha standing there once, coffee in her hands, saying this place made her feel safe. I had promised her I would keep it, no matter what happened, and now that promise was being traded like merchandise. Jackson started talking about my age. He chose his words carefully. Forgetful, not as sharp anymore, needs care. He said a nursing home in the suburbs was ready. Meals, medication. I wouldn't have to struggle with these old things anymore. His eyes didn't move while he spoke, like he was presenting a report. I didn't argue. I didn't mention that the Mustang had been in my name since before Jackson was born. I didn't say this house carried papers I had signed first with my own hand. I asked only one question. "So what do you still need from me?" Chloe handed over the remaining documents. She placed them on the workbench, right where I usually change spark plugs. The final transfer papers. One signature, and everything would be smooth. She said smooth, very softly, like she was afraid the word might crack in the cold air. I looked at the empty line at the bottom of the page. I had signed hundreds of technical drawings, dozens of contracts in my life, but I had never seen a blank space feel this heavy. Jackson stepped closer, lowered his voice. He said if I cooperated, things would be easier to breathe for everyone. He didn't say what would happen if I didn't sign. He didn't have to. In that moment, I understood a simple contradiction. I had spent my whole life fixing broken things, but somehow I never learned when this relationship broke. I taught my son how to stand straight. I never taught him how to look back. I folded the papers, slid them aside. I said I needed time to pack my things. Jackson looked relieved, like it was already settled. Chloe glanced at the car, then turned away. No one asked where I would go. Maybe to them it no longer mattered. When they left, the garage fell quiet again. The wind whistled through the cracks louder now. I stood by the Mustang for a long time. I opened the hood, not to fix anything, just to look. Martha once told me this car wasn't just metal. It was memory. I placed my hand on the engine. It was ice cold. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the workshop packing old tools into a wooden box. Each wrench, each bolt, belonged to a chapter when I believed I had lived right. I didn't cry. I wasn't angry. The clearest feeling was a very deep silence, the kind that comes just before a door closes. Jackson believed I would leave the next morning. A few clothes, everything else behind. He believed it was all arranged. He didn't know that when I knelt on the garage floor, lifted the old floorboard, Martha once said, "Never forget." My mind was no longer asking why. It was asking when. The floorboard popped loose with a dry crack. I hadn't touched that spot in years. Martha once told me, some things should be left alone until they're truly needed. I didn't ask questions back then. I just did what she said. Beneath a thin layer of dust and the smell of old wood sat a gray metal box. The edges were chipped. The lock was rusted, but still solid. I set it on the workbench and sat down very slowly. The wall clock ticked in steady beats. Outside, the wind kept moving across the lake. Inside the shop, everything felt frozen in place. I opened the box. No cash, no jewelry, just stacks of documents neatly arranged, tied with a string that had faded with age. On top was Martha's name. Below it were figures, diagrams, and a contract I recognized instantly, even after 30 years. It was an engine component I had developed during my final years at Ford. A small improvement, nothing flashy, but good enough to make it into production. Back then, I transferred ownership into my wife's name, not to hide anything, but because Martha always said a family needs a reserve, something that exists quietly, as long as no one is paying attention. I had forgotten about it. Or maybe I chose not to remember. Life after retirement was calm enough that I believed I would never need it. There was also a handwritten note from Martha, her familiar handwriting, straight, precise. She wrote that if one day everything around me was taken too easily, I should remember there were still things that belonged to me, as long as I was clear-minded enough to recognize them. I sat there for a long time, not because I was shocked, but because the pieces were finally fitting together. Jackson believed I no longer had control over anything. Maybe that was why he felt bold enough to go this far. The next morning I made coffee like always. I didn't pack any more boxes. Instead, I turned on the old computer in the shop. The screen lit up slowly, but it still worked. I entered information I hadn't used in years. After a few confirmations, the account appeared. The number on the screen made me take a deep breath. Royalty payments had been going in regularly, year after year. I had never withdrawn anything, never really checked. Now the balance was far beyond what I had ever imagined. Not because I needed it, but because it gave me a choice. And at this age, choice is a luxury. While I was sitting there, Jackson was in Chicago. I knew because he sent a short message reminding me that someone would come measure the house again the next morning. The message ended with a cold question. Was I ready? I didn't reply. Around noon, I called an old friend. We had worked together during my final years at the company. He referred me to a lawyer who specialized in family matters that weren't exactly peaceful. An appointment was set for the same day. I didn't tell him much. I just said I needed to know where I really stood. The afternoon passed quickly. When the lawyer sat across from me in the shop, he went through every page Jackson had sent. The more he read, the tighter his expression became. Some signatures didn't match. Some clauses were being used outside their purpose. More importantly, there were documents I had never signed. He said I had more than enough grounds to freeze every transaction. He also said reporting it immediately would end things very quickly. I listened, but I didn't rush. I asked him something else. What if I didn't want this to end quickly? He looked at me, stayed quiet for a few seconds, then nodded. Some roads are longer, but they force people to walk all the way to the end. That evening, I drove out to the lakeshore. The air was cold. The water darkened as the light faded. I stood there thinking about Jackson and Chloe. I imagined them sitting in a brightly lit restaurant, talking about the house, the car, how neatly everything had been handled. They wouldn't be thinking about me. And, strangely enough, that made me calm. I returned to the shop and locked the door carefully. Before turning off the lights, I looked back at the Mustang. It was still there, whole, silent. I knew this confrontation wouldn't begin with noise. It would begin with preparation, and I was no longer standing still. The next morning, I didn't go out to the lake. I stayed in the shop, not because I feared the cold, but because I needed that silence to think clearly. Once you reach this point, every move has to follow an order. I've fixed enough machines to know this. Turn the wrong bolt, and the whole system locks up. The lawyer came back around noon. He brought a new file. Thicker, cleaner. We sat across from each other, a scarred wooden table between us. I didn't retell the story. He already had enough. This time I asked only one thing. If I want to keep control, what do I do first? He spoke about forged signatures. No hesitation, no emotion, just facts. Jackson had used an old power of attorney. Changed the dates, signed in my place. For the house, for the car. Either one was enough to freeze every transaction, if I chose to. But I didn't nod right away. I asked another question slowly. What if I want him to believe I have nothing left? The lawyer went quiet for a moment. Then he understood. He said it wasn't difficult, if I was willing to go a little further. Not to hide things, but to rearrange them. That afternoon, we created a trust. I chose a very simple name, Remorse. Not for me, not for Jackson, just a reminder to myself that if I walked this road to the end, I wouldn't turn back because of emotion. All the royalty income was transferred into it, quietly, no announcements. Everything happened on paper within a few hours. When it was done, my old account held only a very small amount. Looking at it, I didn't feel loss. I felt emptiness, the kind that was necessary. That night, I deliberately left the computer on in the shop. The screen was still glowing when I walked away. I knew Jackson would come. He always believed I was careless. This time, I let him be right. The next morning, the call came. Jackson's voice was different. Not sharp, not cold like before. He asked if I had checked the account. I told him I couldn't remember the password anymore. I spoke slowly. Honestly, on the other end, there was a short pause. I pictured him staring at the number he believed was my entire life. After that call, I knew I had found his breathing rhythm. At the same time, my lawyer contacted the buyer of the house, a man I had never met, but someone who knew Jackson's name very well in financial circles. The request to speed up the handover came from his side. I didn't ask why. I only needed to know that time had begun leaning toward me. Jackson started texting nonstop. At first it was pressure, then irritation. He said the buyer was pushing hard, that the contract carried heavy penalties if the house wasn't delivered on time. I replied with short messages. No promises, no refusals. I said I was packing. I said I needed more time. Chloe began appearing in the messages too. Her tone was softer, gentler. She called me Dad, something she rarely did before. She talked about family, about how things would be better if I cooperated. I read everything. Then I turned the phone off. That afternoon, I drove to the notary's office. I didn't sign anything. I only asked for copies of the old documents, seeing my signature placed beside lines I had never read. I didn't feel angry. I saw more clearly than ever that Jackson hadn't just sold property. He had sold the last trust I had left for him. That night, I did one more thing. I reported the Mustang as unlawfully taken. Not because I wanted to make noise, but because I needed to stop a transaction that had gone too far. The report was accepted. Everything followed procedure. No one questioned me much. Some things, once there's enough ground, close on their own. When I returned to the shop, it was fully dark. I sat down without turning on the lights. I thought about Jackson, about how he used to sit beside me as a boy watching me work, asking endless little questions. I once believed he understood the value of things that couldn't be sold. Now everything was clear. The hunter had walked too deep into a forest he didn't understand. And I, the man he thought was exhausted, was the one who knew every way out. I turned on the light. In front of me was the plan the lawyer had left behind. Every step was ready. From this moment on, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was leading. I didn't track Jackson hour by hour, but I knew when things started slipping out of his hands. It was the night before Christmas. Chicago was brighter than usual then, but places that shine too much often hide the deepest shadows. I was sitting in the shop when my phone vibrated. Not Jackson, an unfamiliar number. I let it ring out, then listened to the voicemail. A rushed voice. Jackson's name. A payment coming due, and a warning that they wouldn't wait long. I turned the phone off. No need to listen again. A few minutes later, Jackson's message came in. No more pressure, just panic, squeezed into short sentences. He said the house buyer was threatening to enforce penalty clauses. He said the car deal had been locked down. He asked what I had done. I didn't answer right away. I looked at the clock. I knew that for Jackson, silence right now weighed more than any words. I stood up, put on my coat, and went outside. The air was colder than before. The wind off the lake was dry and sharp. I drove a short loop, then came back. I didn't need to go anywhere. I just needed time to move at its proper pace. In Chicago, Jackson and Chloe weren't sitting in restaurants anymore. I pictured them in their new apartment. White lights, air stretched tight like a pulled wire, calls stacking on top of each other, numbers repeated so many times they lost meaning. When money doesn't arrive, words begin to change color. I didn't hear it directly, but I knew the feeling. I'd seen it before, in systems, on the edge of overload. Near midnight, Jackson called. This time no circling. He asked if there was anything I could do to help. I could hear Chloe in the background, quiet, urgent. I told him I had nothing left to help with. I repeated the balance in the old account. I said I was preparing to leave, just as he wanted. On the other end, the silence stretched. Then Jackson hung up. Christmas night passed in gaps. The next morning, another message came in, this time from Chloe. Not a plea, just a statement. She said she was leaving. She said things had gone too far. I read it. I wasn't surprised. Some people stay only while the lights are still on. Jackson called again around noon. His voice was rough. He said Chloe had packed her things. He said there was someone else. He said everything was falling apart. I listened. I didn't interrupt. When he stopped, I asked only one question. "Where are you right now?" He said he was driving back to the lake house. He said he needed to talk. I didn't stop him. I didn't promise anything either. That afternoon, I drove there first. The house had been sealed under the buyer's temporary order. Everything exactly as planned. I stood outside looking through the glass. Inside, nothing had changed, except it no longer belonged to Jackson. I heard a car stop behind me. Jackson stepped out. His walk wasn't quick anymore. When he saw the seal, he froze. A black limousine pulled up at the end of the drive. No show, just enough presence to create distance. I stepped forward. I didn't speak right away. I let Jackson see me in the suit he had never seen before, not to show off, just to close an old image he was still clinging to. Jackson opened his mouth. No sound came out. I told him to get in the car. He did, out of habit. On the drive, no one spoke. The city passed by the windows. Cold. Still. We stopped in front of a large machine shop on the outskirts. Yellow lights, the familiar smell of metal. I led Jackson inside. I told him this place needed people. Not people who give orders. People who work. I said if he wanted to keep what little was left of himself, he would start on the floor. Jackson looked around. He asked about the money. I told him it was locked away. I told him everything else was his choice. If he walked away, the documents he had signed in my name would find their way to where they belonged. I didn't threaten. I stated facts. Jackson sat down, very slowly. In his eyes there was no calculation left, only exhaustion. I left him there. I walked outside. It was dark now. Light snow was falling. I drove away, without looking back. Behind me, the shop door closed. Not to imprison, but to mark a point of no return. I didn't return to the machine shop that night. I needed distance. Not to run away, but to let things settle. As the car moved along the lakeside road, I thought about Martha. She used to say that some lessons can't be taught with words. People have to walk through them on their own. The next morning I went back. The shop was open. The smell of metal engine oil and cold air mixed together, familiar enough to calm me. Jackson was there. He wasn't standing around. He wasn't talking. He was holding a broom, working slowly, awkwardly. No one was giving orders. No one was watching closely. I let things unfold the way they were meant to. The days that followed moved at a steady pace. I didn't show up much. I came by at set, hours watched from a distance. Jackson stopped asking about money. He started asking about the work. Simple questions. Sometimes clumsy ones. I answered just enough. No lectures. No blame. The same way I was taught when I first started. Do the work and understanding will follow. The trust stayed where it was. Silent. I didn't touch it. I didn't promise anything. I let Jackson learn on his own that this road had no shortcuts. Some evenings I saw him stay late wiping up oil he had spilled that morning. I didn't praise him. I just nodded when I passed by. A week after Christmas, I opened the old garage. The 1967 Ford Mustang was still there, under a thin layer of dust. I cleaned it slowly, piece by piece. I didn't need to check much. I knew it was still fine. Some things, when cared for long enough, don't break easily. I drove it out at dusk. Not far, just a loop around the lake. The wind was cold, but clean. I didn't think about Jackson then. I thought about the years behind me, the right choices, the wrong ones I had carried. I realized I wasn't angry anymore. That feeling had been replaced by a quiet relief, hard to name. When I returned to the shop, Jackson was waiting. He stood straighter than before. He said he understood why I hadn't given him the money. He said that if he was given a chance, he wanted to do things right. I didn't answer right away. I looked at his hands. small cuts, fresh. I told him this. Doing right isn't a promise. It's what you do every day. I showed him the Mustang. I didn't tell the old stories. I just said that some things don't belong to the market. Jackson nodded. For the first time, it wasn't a hurried nod. Winter slowly passed. Lake Michigan began to thaw. The shop kept running steadily. Jackson was no longer sweeping floors. But he wasn't favored either. He learned to arrive early, to leave late, to stay quiet when needed. I saw the change in him. Not loud, not perfect, but real. One afternoon, I closed the old garage. I decided to sell the lake house. On my terms. Not out of debt. Not under pressure. Just because I wanted to begin a lighter chapter. I kept the car. I kept what needed to be kept. The day I left, Jackson walked me to the shop door. No long apologies. Just a short sentence. Enough, I answered, with the familiar nod. I don't know what his future will look like. I only know that this time, he's walking on his own feet. I drove the Mustang that evening. The road was empty. The headlights stretched far ahead. I didn't disappear. I simply kept living more quietly. My son once believed he had sold my past. In truth, he was given a chance to rebuild his own future. And for me, that is enough. If you've listened to this story all the way through, thank you for your time. If it gave you something to think about, please like, subscribe, and share so stories like this can keep being told. Every follow is a quiet encouragement, and it means more than you know. Thank you for listening, from wherever you are.